The mining shuttle exploded in silence against the backdrop of distant stars. David Reed felt the shockwave through his boots as he worked the asteroid's surface, his helmet light cutting through the darkness. Emergency klaxons screamed in his ears as debris rained down around him. He turned toward the shuttle just in time to see alien ships emerging from hyperspace like silver daggers against the void. His oxygen gauge showed 3 hours remaining. The nearest station was 6 hours away. David did what humans do best when, faced with impossible odds, he got to work. He sealed his suit's emergency patches and began calculating trajectories to the largest piece of shuttle wreckage. If he could reach the emergency beacon, maybe someone would find his body. The alien ships moved with predatory grace, their hulls gleaming like liquid metal. David had heard stories of first contact protocols, but those were for diplomats and scientists. He was just a miner who happened to be in the wrong place when the galaxy decided to notice humanity. The ships circled him like sharks, their weapon systems clearly targeting his small form against the asteroid's surface. David raised his hand slowly. The universal gesture of surrender. It seemed to work. A tractor beam locked onto him, pulling him toward the largest ship. As he passed through the energy field that separated vacuum from atmosphere, David felt gravity return to his boots. The bay doors sealed behind him with a soft hiss. The aliens waiting for him were unlike anything in Earth's databases. The leader stood 8 feet tall with gray scales that caught the light like armor. Its eyes were golden and unblinking, studying David with the intensity of a scientist examining a specimen. Behind it stood creatures that defied easy description. One looked like living crystal, another seemed to be made of overlapping plates of bone. Human, the scaled one spoke, its voice translated by devices that made the words echo strangely. You are designated test subject 7439. You will comply with all instructions. Resistance will result in immediate termination. David removed his helmet and breathed the recycled air. It tasted of ozone and something metallic. I'm David Reed. What do you want with me? The scaled alien tilted its head, a gesture that somehow conveyed both curiosity and disdain. Your species has been selected for evaluation. You will be processed according to Galactic Council protocols. They led him through corridors that seemed to shift and change as they walked. The walls showed scenes of distant worlds, red deserts under twin suns, cities floating in ammonia clouds, forests of glass that sang in alien winds. David memorized each turn, each door, each security checkpoint. The habits of survival ran deep. The processing chamber was sterile white, so clean it hurt to look at. Machines with purposes David couldn't guess hummed quietly in the corners. The scaled alien gestured to a platform in the center of the room. Remove your environmental suit. You will be provided with appropriate clothing. David complied, noting the positions of every alien in the room. The crystal being stepped forward with instruments that looked like they belonged in a hospital or a torture chamber. The scans were thorough, but not painful. Lights passed over every inch of his body while machines recorded data that appeared on screens and symbols he couldn't read. Interesting, the bone-plated alien spoke for the first time. Its voice sounded like grinding stone. Biped, carbon-based, standard oxygen-nitrogen requirements. Nothing exceptional in the preliminary scans. The scaled one David decided to call it Korthek based on what the others called it. Studied the readouts with those unblinking golden eyes. Physical parameters within expected ranges for a Class M species. Genetic markers show recent evolutionary development. No obvious adaptations for extreme environments. They gave him clothes that felt like paper but seemed stronger than steel. Gray pants, gray shirt, gray shoes that fit perfectly despite no measurements being taken. The material adapted to his body temperature, keeping him comfortable in the alien environment. You will be housed in Section 7 until testing begins, Korthek announced. Nutritional requirements will be met. Any attempt to damage the facility or harm personnel will result in immediate termination. The cell was larger than David expected. White walls, white floor, white ceiling, a bed that looked more like a surgical table, a small alcove with water and what might have been a toilet. A slot in the wall that dispensed food that tasted like cardboard but satisfied his hunger. David sat on the bed and began his real work. He studied every surface for weaknesses, every seam in the walls for gaps. The light came from panels that dimmed and brightened in what seemed like a day-night cycle. He timed the intervals, 26 hours and 14 minutes. Either they were matching his circadian rhythm or this was their natural cycle. The food slot operated on a schedule. 3 times per cycle, exactly 8 hours apart. The water was clean and cold. The air moved in patterns that suggested ventilation shafts somewhere behind the walls. David traced the air currents with small pieces of lint from his clothes. On the 3rd day they came for him. Korthik led a group of different aliens, this time shorter, with multiple eyes and skin that looked like leather. They carried devices that hummed with energy. David recognized weapons when he saw them. Testing phase will now commence, Korthik announced. You will be evaluated across multiple parameters. Your cooperation will be noted in the final assessment. They led him to a different section of the facility. The corridors here were wider, with higher ceilings. David counted steps, memorized turns, noted security checkpoints. The guards carried their weapons casually, but David noticed they never turned. Their backs to him completely. The testing chamber was enormous. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above. Equipment lined the walls like the instruments of some vast orchestra. Other aliens observed from behind transparent barriers. David felt like a bug under a microscope. Physical evaluation will begin. Now, Korthik said, you will complete a series of tasks designed to measure your species' capabilities. Begin with the platform to your left. David walked to the indicated platform, his mind already working. These weren't just tests, they were measurements. The aliens were trying to determine something specific about humans. The question was what, and more importantly, why. The platform rose into the air as David stepped onto it. Whatever they wanted to know about humans, they were about to find out. David Reed had survived asteroid mining, corporate restructuring, and a dozen other things that should have killed him. He could survive this too. The real test was just beginning. Pain shot through David's legs as the platform tilted 60 degrees without warning. He shifted his weight and stayed upright while other test subjects in the records had fallen within seconds. The aliens behind their barriers made notes on devices that glowed with soft blue light. David kept his breathing steady and his expression calm. Remarkable balance recovery, the crystal being noted. Its voice sounded like wind chimes in a storm. Most species require significant time to adapt to platform alterations. The platform spun, flipped, and changed temperature from freezing to burning hot. David adjusted his stance, regulated his breathing, and focused on the sensation of his feet against the surface. Back on the asteroid fields, equipment failures meant death. You learned to adapt or you died? This was just another equipment failure. After 2 hours, they moved him to the next test. A maze of corridors that shifted and changed as he walked through them. The walls moved silently, creating new paths and blocking old ones. David began mapping the changes, looking for patterns in the chaos. Every wall movement followed a sequence. Every dead end had a purpose. The leather-skinned aliens watched him work through the maze with growing interest. Subject shows adaptive problem-solving, one spoke into a recording device. No signs of panic response despite repeated path alterations. David found the exit in 47 minutes. The previous record holder, according to the readouts he glimpsed, had taken 4 hours. The difference wasn't speed, it was approach. Most species fought the maze. David had learned to work with it. They led him to a room filled with mechanical puzzles, shapes that needed to be fitted together, sequences that needed to be completed, problems that had no obvious solutions. David's mining experience served him well here. In space, you fixed things with whatever you had available. Improvisation wasn't just useful, it was survival. The puzzles grew more complex as he progressed. Some required tools he had to create from other puzzle pieces. Others needed solutions that seemed impossible until you thought about them differently. David approached each one the same way he approached a broken life support system, methodically, creatively, and with the absolute certainty that there was an answer. Fascinating, Korthik observed. The human doesn't follow conventional solution paths. It creates new approaches for each problem. The crystal being rippled with what might have been excitement. Previous subjects attempted to force solutions. This one adapts the solution to the problem rather than the problem to the solution. Next came the psychological evaluations. They put David in simulated scenarios designed to measure stress responses, fear reactions, and decision-making under pressure. The simulations were incredibly realistic: burning buildings, crashing ships, alien attackers. David treated each one like a training exercise. In one simulation, he was trapped in a flooding compartment with limited oxygen. Instead of panicking, David systematically searched for ways to stop the water flow, create air pockets, and signal for help. The aliens running the test had to manually end the simulation when David found a solution they hadn't programmed. Subject: demonstrates exceptional stress tolerance, the bone-plated alien reported. Fight or flight responses are present but controlled. Decision-making actually improves under pressure. During the fear response test, they showed David images and scenarios designed to trigger primal terror. Predators, falling, darkness, suffocation. David's heart rate increased, his pupils dilated, but he continued to function normally. Fear was information, not paralysis. Interesting, Korthik mused. The human experiences fear but doesn't allow it to control behavior. This is highly unusual. The memory tests came next. They showed David sequences of lights, sounds, and symbols, then asked him to repeat them. David had learned to memorize equipment manuals, safety procedures, and emergency protocols. His brain treated the alien sequences the same way. What surprised the researchers was David's ability to find patterns in seemingly random data. He connected sequences that weren't obviously related and predicted patterns before they completed. The mining fields had taught him to read the subtle signs that meant equipment was about to fail. Pattern recognition kept you alive. Subject: shows enhanced pattern recognition abilities, the crystal being noted. Processing speed exceeds most tested species by significant margins. They tested his physical endurance next. Treadmills that increased speed and incline unpredictably. Weights that grew heavier as he lifted them. Obstacles that required strength, agility, and coordination. David had spent years in low gravity wearing heavy equipment, working in environments that tried to kill you every second. The aliens watched in fascination as David's endurance seemed to increase with fatigue. Instead of slowing down, he found more efficient ways to move. Instead of weakening, he discovered reserves of strength he didn't know he had. The human body was designed for persistence hunting, though David didn't know that term. Remarkable. The leather-skinned alien observed. Efficiency improves with stress. Most species show degraded performance as energy reserves deplete. The final test of the day was social interaction. They put David in scenarios with holographic beings and asked him to negotiate, cooperate, and resolve conflicts. David approached each situation with the same methodical patience he used for everything else. He listened more than he spoke. He looked for common ground. He found solutions that benefited everyone involved. When holographic beings became aggressive, David didn't escalate, he de-escalated. When they tried to cheat him, he found ways to make honesty more profitable than deception. Subject shows advanced social reasoning, Korthik noted. Cooperation strategies are sophisticated. Conflict resolution approaches are highly effective. As they led David back to his cell, he overheard fragments of conversation between the researchers. They were confused by his results. He scored well on every test but didn't dominate any single area. His scores were consistently above average without being exceptional. The human presents an unusual profile, Korthik was saying. No obvious weaknesses but no obvious strengths either, just ... Competence across all measured parameters. Perhaps that is the strength, the crystal being suggested. Specialization creates vulnerabilities. Generalization creates adaptability. David lay on his bed that night, staring at the ceiling. The tests had been challenging but not impossible. He'd approached each one the same way he approached everything, as a problem to be solved. The aliens seemed surprised by his consistency, but David didn't understand why. He thought about the fragments of conversation he'd heard. They were looking for something specific, some quality that would determine humanity's fate. David didn't know what they were looking for, but he suspected the real test hadn't started yet. The food slot chimed softly, dispensing his evening meal. David ate mechanically while his mind worked. The aliens had technology far beyond anything. On Earth, they had weapons that could destroy planets. They had the power to decide whether humanity lived or died, but they were testing him for a reason. They wanted to understand something about humans before they made their decision. David intended to give them an education they wouldn't forget. Tomorrow would bring new tests, new challenges, new opportunities to show these aliens what humans were really made of. David Reed had survived everything the universe had thrown at him so far. Whatever came next, he would survive that too. The lights dimmed to signal the end of the cycle. David closed his eyes and began planning for tomorrow's tests. In the darkness, he allowed himself a small smile. The aliens thought they were testing him. They had no idea he was testing them right back. 3 weeks of testing had yielded results that frustrated the research team. David Reed sat in his cell, calmly eating breakfast, while Korthak reviewed the data for the 100th time. The human performed consistently above average in every category without excelling in any single area. His psychological profile showed remarkable stability under stress, but offered no insights into his species' true nature. "The standard protocols have failed," Korthak announced to the assembled researchers. "We have extensive data on human capabilities but no understanding of human essence." The crystal being shimmered with agitation. "The Council requires definitive assessment. Standard testing measures ability? It does not measure character." Character? Korthak's scales rippled with confusion. "That parameter is not quantifiable." "It is when death is involved," the bone-plated alien interjected. "Every species reveals its true nature when faced with certain termination." The word sent a chill through the observation chamber. The researchers had access to the ultimate test, but none had suggested using it. The Devourer hadn't been awakened in over a century. The last species to face it had been the Vorthak, a warrior race that had fought bravely and died screaming. "The Nightmare Protocol," Korthak spoke the words with reverence and dread. "It has been authorized for use only 17 times in recorded history." The crystal being rippled with nervous energy. 16 species have faced the Devourer. 16 species have provided definitive data on their fundamental nature. The test has never failed to produce conclusive results. Deep beneath the facility, in a chamber that existed outside normal space-time, something stirred. The Devourer had been sleeping for decades, sustained by technologies that kept it alive but dormant. It had been created by the Vorthak Empire as the ultimate biological weapon before their civilization collapsed. The Galactic Council had salvaged it as a testing tool. A final judge of character. The creature stood 12 feet tall when fully extended. Its body was a nightmare fusion of organic and artificial elements, flesh that could regenerate instantly, claws that could cut through any known material, skin that could adapt to any environment. It had been designed to kill everything it encountered and to enjoy the process. "The human will be prepared for transfer," Korthak decided. "Full psychological monitoring will be maintained. All staff will observe from maximum safe distance." David was finishing his afternoon meal when the guards came for him. More guards than usual, and they carried weapons he hadn't seen before. Their tension was palpable, their movements careful and precise. Something had changed. "Special evaluation," Korthak announced as they led him through corridors he'd never seen before. "Your cooperation in this final assessment will be noted." The elevator descended far deeper than David had realized the facility extended. The walls here were different, older, built from materials that seemed to absorb light. The air grew colder with each level they descended. Emergency lighting cast long shadows that danced as they walked. Final assessment? David asked. Are we done with the standard tests? The standard tests have been completed, Korthik replied. This evaluation measures different parameters. They reached a chamber that took David's breath away. The arena was enormous, with walls that curved upward into darkness. The floor was smooth metal, polished to mirror brightness. Observation. Platforms ringed the space at different levels, all protected by energy barriers that hummed with power. You will enter the arena, Korthik instructed. You will face the final test. Your performance will determine your species classification. David studied the space with practiced eyes. No cover, no weapons, no obvious exits. The walls were too smooth to climb, too high to reach, even if climbing were possible. Whatever was coming would have every advantage. What exactly am I facing? David asked. Truth, the crystal being answered. You will face the ultimate truth of your species' nature. They sealed him in the arena with a barrier of solid energy. David walked to the center of the space, his footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. Above him, aliens gathered behind their protective barriers. He could see recording devices, monitoring equipment, and what looked like weapon systems aimed. At the arena floor, a section of the wall began to iris open. The opening was 20 feet across and perfectly circular. Beyond it lay darkness so complete it seemed solid. David heard something moving in that darkness, breathing, scraping, sounds that made his nervous system scream danger. The Devourer awakens, Korthik announced over the chamber's communication system. It has killed every sentient being placed in this arena. It was designed to be the perfect predator, created by a race that understood death better than any other. The creature that emerged from the darkness was the stuff of nightmares. It moved with liquid grace despite its massive size, its obsidian claws clicking against the metal floor. Its eyes were the color of fresh blood, and they fixed on David with predatory intelligence. When it opened its mouth, acid dripped from teeth that could bite through starship hulls. David felt his heart rate spike. His mouth went dry. Every survival instinct screamed at him to run, to hide, to do anything except stand there and face this impossible creature. But there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Instead, David did something that surprised even himself. He began to remove his shirt. Interesting, the bone-plated alien observed. The human isn't retreating. Standard fear responses are present but controlled. David wrapped his shirt around his right hand, then began removing his belt. The Devourer watched with amused interest, its head tilted like a cat watching a mouse. It had seen this before prey that tried to prepare for death. The preparation never mattered. Come on then, David said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the chamber's acoustics. Let's get this over with. The Devourer's eyes widened. In all its centuries of existence, no prey had ever issued an invitation. Most ran, some fought, a few tried to hide. None had ever looked it in the eye and offered challenge. David wrapped his belt around his left hand, leaving the metal buckle exposed. His heart was pounding, but his breathing was controlled. He'd faced death before in the asteroid fields, in equipment failures, in corporate downsizing. This was just another form of death. The difference was that this time, death had a face. The Devourer began to circle him, its movements hypnotic and terrifying. David turned to keep it in sight, noting how it moved, looking for patterns in its behavior. Everything had patterns. Everything had weaknesses. The human is studying the Devourer, Korthik noted with surprise. It's analyzing threat vectors instead of preparing for death. The crystal being rippled with excitement. Look at its eyes. The fear is there but controlled. It's not preparing to die, it's preparing to fight. The Devourer lunged without warning, moving faster than anything. That large should be able to move. David threw himself sideways, rolling across the smooth floor. Claws that could cut through armor passed through the space. Where he'd been standing, the creature turned with impossible grace and prepared to strike again. David climbed to his feet, his makeshift weapons ready. His eyes met the Devourer's gaze. And for the first time in its existence, The ultimate predator saw something it had never seen before. It saw fire. The real test was about to begin. The Devourer's second attack came like liquid lightning. David rolled left as razor claws carved furrows in the metal floor where he'd been standing. The creature's momentum carried it past him, and David struck out with his belt buckle, managing to scrape a line across the beast's flank. The wound sealed instantly, but the Devourer roared in surprise. "The human damaged it," the bone-plated alien whispered. "Nothing has ever damaged the Devourer during initial contact." David didn't celebrate his small victory. The creature was already turning, its blood-red eyes blazing with something that might have been respect. It had expected easy prey. Instead, it had found something that fought back. The Devourer charged again, but this time David was ready. He used the creature's size against it, ducking under its swipe and rolling between its legs. As he passed underneath, he drove his belt buckle upward, targeting what looked like a vulnerable joint. The metal scraped against chitinous armor, but found no purchase. The creature spun with impossible speed, its tail whipping around like a club. David saw it coming and dropped flat, feeling the displaced air ruffle his hair. The tail strike would have shattered every bone in his body. Instead, it whistled harmlessly overhead. "Remarkable adaptation speed," Korthik observed. "The human is learning the Devourer's attack patterns in real time." David rolled to his feet and immediately had to dodge another claw strike. The Devourer was getting frustrated, its attacks becoming more aggressive. David used this against it, baiting the creature into overextending itself. When it lunged too far, David struck at its eyes with his improvised weapons. The Devourer jerked its head back, and David's belt buckle traced a shallow cut across its snout. The wound healed instantly, but the creature had flinched. For the first time in its existence, the ultimate predator had shown defensive behavior. "This is unprecedented," the crystal being chimed. "The Devourer has never exhibited self-preservation instincts during testing." The battle settled into a deadly dance. The Devourer would attack with claws, teeth, and tail. David would dodge, weave, and strike back when opportunities presented themselves. His shirt wrapped around his hand was already torn and bloodied. But he maintained his grip on the makeshift weapon. Minutes passed. The Devourer's attacks grew more frenzied as it realized this prey was different. David's breathing remained controlled, his movements economical. He was treating this like a mechanical problem. Analyze the machine, find its weaknesses, exploit them methodically. The creature's next attack came from above. It leaped toward the ceiling, using its claws to grip the smooth walls, then launched itself downward like a missile. David saw it coming and did something that defied all logic. He ran toward the attack instead of away from it. The Devourer's claws extended to catch him, but David slid on his knees at the last second, passing under the creature's body. As it crashed to the floor behind him, David spun and drove his belt buckle toward its neck. The metal found a gap in the creature's armor, and for the first time, the Devourer bled. The wound was shallow, but it was real. The creature's regeneration sealed it quickly, but not before David saw something important. The Devourer could be hurt. It could bleed, it could die. The human drew blood, Korthik breathed. In 3 centuries, nothing has made the Devourer bleed. David's eyes blazed with newfound determination. He'd found the creature's weakness, the joints between its armor plates. The coverage wasn't perfect. Nothing was perfect. There were always gaps, always vulnerabilities. The Devourer's rage was magnificent and terrible. It attacked with everything it had, claws and teeth and tail, working in perfect coordination. David gave ground, letting the creature's fury work against it. Angry opponents made mistakes. Desperate opponents made bigger mistakes. David's shirt finally tore apart, leaving him with only the belt around his left hand. His knuckles were bloody, his body marked with dozens of shallow cuts from near misses. But he was still fighting, still moving, still looking for opportunities. The Devourer lunged again, and David rolled aside. But this time, he didn't escape cleanly. The creature's claws caught his right shoulder, tearing through flesh and muscle. David screamed as agony shot through his body, but he didn't stop moving. "The human is wounded," the bone-plated alien noted. Significant trauma to the upper torso. Blood loss is substantial. David clutched his wounded shoulder, feeling warm blood between his fingers. The pain was incredible, but pain was just information. It told him he was hurt, not that he was finished. There was a difference. The devourer pressed its advantage, sensing weakness. It attacked with renewed fury, driving David back toward the arena wall. David found himself cornered, trapped between the creature and the smooth metal surface. The devourer's eyes gleamed with triumph, but David wasn't done yet. As the creature reared back for the killing blow, David did something that shocked everyone watching. He smiled. "Is that all you've got?" he asked, his voice carrying clearly through. The chamber. The devourer hesitated, confused by this praise reaction. In that moment of confusion, David acted. He grabbed a piece of his own torn shirt from the floor, a piece still wet with his blood, and threw it at the creature's eyes. The devourer flinched reflexively, and David struck. He drove his belt buckle toward the creature's throat, aiming for the gap he'd found earlier. The metal bit deep, finding nerve clusters that even the devourer's creators hadn't fully armored. The creature roared in pain and surprise, stumbling backward. David pressed his advantage, striking again and again at the vulnerable spot. Each hit drove the metal deeper. Each strike brought more blood. The devourer's movements became erratic, its coordination failing. David had found something vital, something that even its legendary regeneration couldn't heal fast enough. The creature's own blood was slicking the arena floor, making its footing uncertain. "The devourer is losing," Korthek said in disbelief. "It's actually losing." David didn't let up. He could feel strength leaving his body as blood loss took its toll, but he pushed through the weakness. The creature was hurt, vulnerable. This was his chance. The devourer made one last desperate attack, throwing its entire body weight behind. A claw strike that would have cut David in half. But David was ready. He dropped low, letting the claws pass over his head, then drove upward with everything he had left. His belt buckle found the creature's throat again, but this time David didn't. Pull back, he drove the metal deeper, twisting it, using his entire body weight to force it through armor and flesh. The devourer's eyes went wide with shock and something that might have been fear. The creature staggered, then crashed to the arena floor. Its blood pooled around its massive form, darker than the shadows that had birthed it. The devourer's breathing was labored, its eyes glazing over. David stood over the dying creature, his own blood dripping steadily to the floor. His shoulder screamed with pain, his vision blurred from blood loss, but he remained standing. He looked up at the observation platforms, his eyes blazing with an inner fire that made the alien observers step back from their barriers. "I assume that was your final test?" he asked, his voice steady despite his injuries. The devourer took one last shuddering breath, then lay still. The ultimate predator, the creature that had killed every sentient being placed in this arena, was dead. Killed by a human with improvised weapons and nothing but stubborn determination, the observation chamber fell silent. In all their recorded history, nothing like this had ever happened. The test that had defined species for centuries had been passed for the first time. David Reed, bleeding and exhausted, stood victorious in the center of the arena. The fire in his eyes burned brighter than ever, and the aliens watching knew they had witnessed something that would change the galaxy. Forever, the human had passed the test. The question now was whether the galaxy was ready for what that meant. Emergency medical teams swarmed the arena floor as David collapsed to his knees beside the devourer's corpse. The alien medics worked with efficient precision, sealing his wounds with technologies that seemed like magic. David remained conscious. Throughout the treatment, his eyes never leaving the dead creature at his feet. "Remarkable," the lead medic whispered. "The human's vital signs are stabilizing despite massive trauma. Most species would have entered shock hours ago." David allowed them to treat his wounds, but his mind was already working. The test was over, but the real challenge was just beginning. These aliens had the power to decide humanity's fate, and David had just shown them something they'd never seen before. The question was whether they would see it as a threat or an opportunity. 3 days later, David sat in a different chamber larger more formal, with seats arranged in a semicircle around a central platform. Representatives from dozens of species filled the seats, their various forms creating a bizarre parliament of alien intelligence. At the center sat the Galactic Council's highest authority, a being so ancient that its species had evolved beyond physical form. The human David Reed, the entity spoke without moving, its voice emanating from the air itself. You have completed the ultimate evaluation. Your performance will now be assessed by the full council. Korthik stepped forward, his scaled form moving with nervous energy. Honored Council, the human's test results are unlike anything in our records. Standard evaluations showed consistent above-average performance across all parameters, but no exceptional abilities in any single area. The crystal being chimed its agreement. The human demonstrated remarkable adaptability and stress tolerance. Problem-solving approaches were unconventional but effective. Psychological profiles showed unusual resilience to trauma and fear. These results would typically classify the species as suitable for limited membership, the bone-plated alien added. However, the Nightmare Protocol produced unprecedented results. The ancient entity's attention focused on David with an intensity that made the air crackle. The human defeated the Devourer. In 3 centuries of testing, no species has achieved this outcome. How do you explain this anomaly? David stood slowly, his bandaged shoulder pulling tight. I don't think it's an anomaly. I think it's exactly what you were testing for. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. No test subject had ever addressed the council directly during assessment. The ancient entity's amusement was palpable. Explain, it commanded. Your standard tests measured ability, David said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. The Devourer measured something else. It measured what we do when everything else fails. Korthak's scales rippled with agitation. The human species shows no exceptional physical capabilities, no advanced technology, no unique evolutionary adaptations. By all measures, you should be classified as a minor species. You're right, David agreed. We're not the strongest, not the fastest, not the smartest. We're not even close to the best at any single thing. But we're good enough at everything to survive. The crystal being shimmered with confusion. Survival is not exceptional. All species survive or they become extinct. But we don't just survive, David continued. We adapt, we learn. We find ways to turn disadvantages into advantages. The Devourer was designed to be the perfect predator, but it had never faced prey that fought back effectively. It expected fear, and we gave it strategy. The ancient entity leaned forward with interest. Continue. Every species you've tested has specialized evolution, David explained. You've become the best at specific things, but that creates vulnerabilities. The Devourer could exploit those vulnerabilities because it was designed to fight specialists. David gestured to his bandaged shoulder. Humans are generalists. We're mediocre at everything, but that mediocrity is our strength. We don't break. When our specialty fails because we don't have a specialty, we adapt. The human speaks of adaptation, the bone-plated alien observed, but adaptation requires time. The Devourer allowed no time for adaptation. That's where you're wrong, David said. We were already adapted. Every human carries the genetic memory of 1,000,000 generations of survival. We're persistence hunters. We're problem solvers. We're the species that looked at every hostile environment on our planet and decided to live there anyway. The assembly fell silent as David continued. You want to know what makes humans dangerous? It's not our strength or our speed or our intelligence. It's that we don't know when to quit. We keep fighting when logic says we should surrender. We keep trying when reason says we should give up. The ancient entity's voice carried a note of fascination. The Devourer was created by the Vorthak Empire, the galaxy's greatest warriors. They designed it to be unbeatable. The Vorthak were warriors, David agreed. They fought with honor and courage and died gloriously. But humans don't fight for glory, we fight to win. And when we can't win, we fight to survive. And when we can't survive, we fight to make sure our deaths mean something. Korthak's golden eyes narrowed. You speak of your species as if it possesses some unique quality. Our evaluations show no evidence of exceptional capabilities. That's because you're looking for the wrong thing, David replied. You're measuring peak performance. But humans don't operate at peak performance. We operate at sustainable performance. We can maintain our level of effectiveness for as long as necessary. The crystal being chimed with understanding. The endurance tests. The human's efficiency improved with fatigue rather than degrading. Exactly, David nodded. Other species burn bright and fast. We burn steady and long. The devourer expected a brief, intense fight. Instead, it got a grinding battle of attrition. And humans always win wars of attrition. The bone-plated alien leaned forward. The Council must determine whether humanity represents a threat to galactic stability. We're absolutely a threat, David said without hesitation. But not in the way you think. The chamber erupted in alarmed chatter. The ancient entity raised a hand for silence. Explain this threat. We're a threat to the status quo, David continued. Every species in this galaxy has found its niche, its specialty, its place in the cosmic order. Humans don't fit into niches. We create new ones. We change the rules instead of following them. David gestured to the observation platforms around him. You've built a civilization based on predictable specialization. Each species has its role, its function, its limitations, but humans don't accept limitations. We see barriers as challenges, not boundaries. This could destabilize the entire galactic order, Korthik observed with concern. Or it could revolutionize it, David countered. How long has your civilization been stagnant? How many centuries since you've seen real innovation, real progress, real change? The ancient entity was silent for a long moment. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of eons. The human raises valid points. Our civilization has achieved stability through specialization, but stability can become stagnation. The question before the Council, the crystal being noted, is whether humanity should be granted full membership, limited membership, or classified as a restricted species. There's a fourth option, David said quietly. The assembly turned to him with surprise. Test subjects didn't propose alternatives. To Council decisions, partnership, David continued. Not membership where we follow your rules. Partnership where we work together to solve problems that neither of us can solve alone. What could humans offer that we cannot achieve ourselves? The bone-plated alien asked. A different perspective, David replied. You've been thinking the same way for so long that you can't see new solutions. We think differently because we evolve differently. We see possibilities where you see impossibilities. The ancient entity's attention focused intensely on David. You would have your species serve as advisors to the Council? I would have our species serve as partners, David corrected. We bring our adaptability, you bring your wisdom. We bring our persistence, you bring your technology. Together we might accomplish things that neither of us could achieve alone. And if humanity proves problematic? Korthik asked. David smiled, and the expression sent a chill through the assembly. Then you'll have learned something valuable. About the price of underestimating humans. But I don't think it will come to that. We're very good at making useful partnerships. The Council deliberated for 3 hours while David waited in an adjacent chamber. He used the time to plan contingencies, to consider possible outcomes, to prepare for whatever decision they reached. The habits of survival ran deep. When they summoned him back, the ancient entity spoke with formal gravity. The Galactic Council has reached a decision. Humanity will be granted provisional membership with full privileges, subject to review after 50 standard years. David nodded calmly. And the partnership proposal? The Council recognizes the potential value of human perspectives, the entity replied. A formal exchange program will be established. Human advisors will be assigned to Council committees. Galactic representatives will be stationed on Earth. There is one condition, Korthik added. Humanity's expansion into galactic space will be monitored and regulated. Your species has demonstrated considerable adaptability, The Council wishes to ensure this adaptability serves constructive purposes. Understood, David agreed. When do I go home? Immediately, the ancient entity replied. You will carry our formal invitation to Earth's governments. The integration process will begin within 1 standard year. As David was led from the chamber, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He'd passed their test, but more importantly, he'd given them a new test to consider. Humanity wasn't just another species to be catalogued and filed away. They were a force for change in a galaxy that had grown comfortable with stagnation. The transport ship that carried David back to Earth was faster and more comfortable than the vessel that had brought him to the testing facility. He spent the journey memorizing star charts, studying galactic political structures, and planning for humanity's entry into a larger universe. As Earth grew larger in the viewport, David thought about the message he would carry to his species. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders, but it was also set in its ways. Humanity would change that, one adaptation at a time. The ship entered Earth's atmosphere, and David watched familiar continents pass beneath him. Soon he would tell his species that they were no longer alone. But more importantly, he would tell them that they had work to do. The galaxy had tested humanity and found them acceptable. Now it was humanity's turn to test the galaxy and see what it was really made of. David Reed smiled as the ship touched down on the planet that had made him what he was. The real adventure was just beginning.